This happened way back in 2005. I was 18. I was living in Uvalde, Texas, a very low-income neighborhood, the kind you'll find sprawled out all over the place in rural Texas when you're not right outside of a city. The closest city to me was San Antonio. I was going to some local community college, because that's all my parents could afford for me. One of my best friends from high school, Andrew, moved to San Antonio to go to San Antonio College. He was living in some small apartment a little outside of the city with a roommate. His girlfriend would also often stay with him. Since the city's only really an hour and a half away, I would visit him all the time. He invited me this one weekend to come crash for the night. So I took my trusty old 1995 Toyota pickup truck. Just kidding, the thing was a piece of crap. The gas gauge didn't even work on it. I'd have to always just keep track of when the last time I filled the tank up was, then reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, which was a straight shot from Uvalde to San Antonio. I was on the road at like 3 p.m. on a Friday, and there was no traffic at all. I got to Andrew at a reasonable time. His girlfriend wouldn't be getting there until tomorrow, so tonight we were gonna go out. We stopped at a liquor store and we drank in his apartment for a while with his roommate. Then the three of us went to the dive bar that would kind of look the other way with fake IDs. That was basically our night. We got back to their apartment around 2 a.m. after getting food. I slept on the couch. The next day would have almost been the same thing, but Andrew and his girlfriend were having issues all day, and as the two of them got drunker as the night progressed, she started yelling at him in front of me, and it got really awkward and uncomfortable. I didn't really have much to drink that day because I was already iffy about staying the night with her there. I eventually decided I would just head back home. I said goodbye to everyone and started my journey home. It was very late at night. I want to guess midnight, maybe a little earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I would fly for my pickup standards. But suddenly the engine started sputtering. I felt my heart completely dropped as I realized I forgot to fill up the tank. I slowed down, but it was too late. The engine cut. I pulled to the side of the road and tried starting it a few times, but it did no good. I took out my cell phone, which was equally as shitty as my truck. I tried to get a signal. No shot. I couldn't even call for help. I had to just put my hazards on and hope a good Samaritan would pass. You wouldn't believe how long I sat on the side of the road before seeing headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it zoomed past me, ignoring me. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. I was starting to feel hopeless, like maybe I should just sleep in my car and wait till sunrise to get help. So that's what I was gonna do. I got inside my car, took the key out of the ignition to cut the battery, and just angled my seat back to go to sleep. I would hear the occasional car zooming past like once every 10 minutes, but it didn't feel worth waving people down in the dark. It seemed sketchy for myself and to the people in the cars, but when I was starting to actually drift away to sleep, a car door closing from behind me woke me up. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car pulled up behind me with its headlights off. I turned around now to get a better look. There was some big pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside of it, nor did I see anyone outside of it. Maybe someone pulled over to help. I got out of the car and said "excuse me" to no response. I walked closer to the truck just to confirm no one was inside. Then I walked back to my car. This was weird. I looked towards the trees on the side of the road. Maybe someone was pissing in the woods. I went back inside of my car and locked the door. This was just too weird. Suddenly there was a tap at my window. I jumped. I looked to see a man looking down at me into the car, smiling. I didn't do anything yet. He said, "Hey buddy, you need a hand?" I lowered the window a crack and said, "Hey, I ran out of gas." The man said, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." When he said this, I thought he meant help him with a gas jug to fill up my tank or something, honestly. So I stepped out of the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his truck. But he stood there, looked down at me because he was much taller, still smiling, and said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took me a second to process what he meant. I was literally a broke college student driving a piece of shit pickup truck. I wasn't about to get robbed of the only cash I had and my phone. I ran for it in the direction of the trees. I'm small but fast. I turned around and saw he was chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged all over the place until I seemed to lose him. Then I crouched behind a big tree to catch my breath. And I heard him approaching closer. I quieted my breath. I heard him say out loud, "I'll kill you, you piece of shit." I don't know if he was just saying it out loud out of anger, or if he wanted me to hear it, but I was too scared to move. Even after I heard his footsteps move away, I didn't move. In fact, I stayed in this position the rest of the night, eventually laying behind this big tree, up until dawn. I went back over to the highway to my truck, and the truck behind me was gone, but my truck's doors were both open. I found that my glove box had been gone through and completely emptied of anything somewhat valuable. My flannel hoodie was also taken, which had something in the pocket, I'm sure. I finally managed to wave down a good Samaritan. He gave me a ride to the closest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and the man brought me back to my car, where I filled my tank just enough to drive the truck to a gas station to fill up completely. Then I went straight home. This was a real-life learning experience for me that there are bad people out there who will try to take advantage of you when you're in a vulnerable spot, but there are also good people, like the man who helped me. It's a little-known common courtesy out in the mountains during a snowstorm that if someone's seeking shelter in your cabin, you let them in. No, I wasn't the one offering that courtesy to someone else in the story. I was the one seeking refuge. It was supposed to be a long weekend of hunting, but what started as a cold sunny day quickly formed tons of dark storm clouds, and I quickly found myself right in the middle of a blizzard. After a full, rather unsuccessful day of hunting hares, I was way too far and disoriented to make my way back to my cabin. I had to seek refuge somewhere else. I came across a log cabin nestled between a circle of trees. No lights on, but I still had to try the door. I hit the door with my fist a few times. No answer, but I could hear footsteps on the other side approaching the door. I expected it to open, but it didn't. I shouted that I'm lost and need shelter. The door cracked open, and I heard a voice say, "Come in, leave your boots by the door." I waited a bit, expecting him to open the door fully and formally greet me as anyone would, but that didn't happen, so I pushed the door open myself and entered the dark cabin. The room was lit by 2 candles, just enough for me to see the couch that the man then told me to sleep on. As for the man, all I saw was his silhouette on the far side of the room. The little light from the candles didn't extend that far. I dropped my bag and gun on the floor and laid down on the couch. I thanked the man for letting me crash here till the storm blows over. He didn't answer. His behavior wasn't the most bizarre thing. Folks are strange up in the mountains. If he wasn't up for conversation, I'd just get some early shut-eye. I closed my eyes, though the level of darkness with my eyes closed wasn't much of a difference. I was subconsciously waiting to hear the man's footsteps leave the room, but they never did. I opened my eyes, and his silhouette was still in the corner of the room, just standing there. I felt the need to say, "Yeah, I think I'm just gonna get some sleep now, thanks." No response. I turned to my other side so that I wouldn't be tempted to just keep opening my eyes to check on him. Some time passed, but without having heard his footsteps walk away, the curiosity was eating away at me. I turned over to look again, and this time, I swear to God, the silhouette of the man was closer by at least a few feet. I couldn't make out his face, but the slight glow from the candles would just barely trickle around the man's forehead, and what I saw was disgustingly pale skin. I quickly gathered my belongings and thanked him, but I said I had to go. I didn't look at him anymore, because I don't think I wanted to know what he looked like. I put my boots on outside and hurried back into the blizzard. I came across another cabin down the hill, this one with the lights on. I knocked on the door, and some old man and his wife answered the door. They welcomed me in immediately and were very inviting. They gave me some hot tea and offered me a spot on the couch. I told them my story about the freaky cabin up the hill, and the two looked at each other, puzzled. The woman confirmed 2 times the cabin I was talking about. Then she said, "Honey, the owner of that cabin was murdered 2 years ago. That cabin has been vacant ever since." I'm the sole survivor of a roller coaster that couldn't be stopped for 12 hours last year. I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off from work. I wanted to do something fun, but everyone I knew was busy. Makes sense. I mean, it was a Tuesday. I decided I'd just go to the amusement park by myself. I've done it before and had a great time. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker. Well, not too much anymore. Going 5 miles over the speed limit is about all the excitement I want out of life anymore. I got to the park at around 2 p.m. It was slow, even for a Tuesday. It gave me a sense of excitement because I knew I'd be able to ride a lot of rides without having to be there all day. At the same time, it gave me a weird, uncanny feeling. All this space and not enough people to fill it up. I ignored the feeling and moved on. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to an amusement park, I like to work my way up to the really crazy rides. I'll start small and finish off the day with my favorite. My favorite just happened to be called the Grim Reaper. It feels a little too on the nose, doesn't it? It was 7:30 p.m. and the park closed at 8 p.m. and I knew it was time to get in line for my final ride. I also made a new friend while there. We met standing in line at one of my first rides of the day. We decided after chatting the whole time in line that we'd hang out for the rest of the day. His name was Charlie. We agreed on every ride that day, except for the last. He wanted to end the night on the Mindbinder, but after some convincing, aka the Mindbinder's line was way shorter while passing by, we decided to do the Grim Reaper last. We got in line for the Grim Reaper, and there was hardly anyone in line. It made sense, given that it was almost closing time. Do you think they will let us ride multiple times if the line stays down? Charlie said with his hands clasped excitedly in front of him. I just smiled at him and chuckled. Normally, I would have been excited too, but something in my gut felt so off for some reason. I didn't want to go on one of my favorite rides. Maybe it was the 5 corn dogs I ate a couple hours earlier. I figured. I'm a very rational person. I wasn't the kind of person to let anxiety or worry rule over me. I always thought life was just what you made of it. When we got in line, there were about 60 people, give or take. The people in front of us did their ride, and 30 of us were left in line. People started looking at the time and saying they were tired and just getting out of line. By the time it was our turn, only 19 people were in line. I knew the ride well enough to remember that it held 20 people, so if no one else got in line, they really might let us go multiple times. I really didn't want that though, honestly. I felt even more compelled to get out of line after all those others did too, and I didn't want to seem lame to my new friend if I wanted to get off the coaster after one ride. The time came for us to get on the ride. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had. I wondered if I was all worked up because I watched Final Destination 3 with a friend a couple weeks back, but I wasn't having visions of the terrible fate we would all face. I was just feeling off. I did everything in my power to get it to all make sense and to not worry, but nothing worked. I seriously considered just telling Charlie I didn't feel great after the last ride, but I finally found someone with my taste in roller coasters. I didn't want to let him down. We were towards the back of the line, so we didn't have much say in where we sat. We ended up in the third car from the front. I was just happy we weren't in the front car. As you get on the Grim Reaper, it plays a cheesy little jingle, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive, with music in the background that always sounded so dumb in the past. I couldn't believe it was getting to me. Charlie even hummed along to it while grabbing my arm with happiness. We got in our seats, and an employee came by and pulled down the metal bar restraint to secure us in our seats. It was the kind that strapped you individually over your shoulder. I'm on the chubbier side, but I can always fit into coaster seats. I've never been told I couldn't go on a ride. I'm just sometimes a little snug. It's actually kind of nice because I feel very secure. As we got strapped in, I felt the plastic-coated metal hit my shoulders and chest. It should have given me a sense of comfort and safety, but I just felt trapped. The employee walked back to the station that has the infamous big button that starts the ride. He flashed all a thumbs up and yelled, "Ready for the Reaper." Everyone raised their hands and let out an excited scream. except for me. I let out a large sigh, counting down the seconds, trying to imagine Charlie and I once we were off the ride and how happy we would be. The employee hit the button and we were off. The coaster shot out of the loading station like we were a bullet being shot out of a gun. After that, it started on a relatively slow ascent up a point to a drop off of 60 degrees. A couple of twists and turns, a big loop, and some more twists and turns. About halfway through the ride, I was enjoying myself. I was thinking about how the hard part was done, and I was safe. Just a little anxiety was all. We were rounding out our last bend when a sense of relief came over me. I could see the end of the ride. I was almost done, but the ride didn't start to slow down. Normally, the coaster starts to slowly come to a full stop several hundred feet from the end, but it was still going. As we passed by the loading area, I saw the operators look confused as we raced by. I noticed no one else was waiting in line. Someone screamed one more time, and everyone on board gave an excited response. Everyone except for me. Charlie looked over at me and grabbed my wrist. Yes, I knew they would let us keep going. This is awesome. He let out an excited yelp as we reached the climb to the drop. He was beaming with joy the whole rest of the lap. We passed by the loading area once again, but this time the coaster operator had a couple other people standing with him. The operator who strapped us looked red and worried. As we were whipped by the employees for our third ride of the day, the other riders were divided. Some were still excited, screaming, "Let's go, one more time," or "Best day ever." Yeah. Some people started to sound scared. Not everyone noticed the employees looking frazzled. I can promise you one thing. I noticed. We started going up the incline again. This was the slowest part of the ride, at around 10 miles per hour and slowing down a little as it reached its peak. This gave us opportunities to take a breath or try to talk, although it was only for a total of about 20 seconds. Are we stuck? I said nervously to Charlie. I'm sure we are fine. There is just a malfunction with the electrical system not activating the brakes or something. There is always a manual shut-off. He was cut off, and we went down the steep hill. We passed by yet again, this time with more people looking worried and someone standing close to where the coaster would go by. He tried to yell at us as we went by, but we couldn't really understand him. Maybe something about them working on getting us off. This time, as we zoomed by, everyone was scared and starting to panic. I guess it didn't sink in for some people what was happening until right now. We went around a 5th time, and everything remained the same. On the 6th time, we were at the peak and saw a fire truck coming into the parking lot. From the top of the incline, we had a perfect view of the parking lot, along with the side of a highway a little further out. It took 2 more loops around the track by the time the fire department got to us. Not just them, but police officers and ambulances. It started to scare me. Why did they get ambulances? Is it just protocol, or is there more to this? Someone came in a few minutes later with a big white board that they used to write messages to us. The ride was too loud when passing by them to hear anything, so this was their only way to talk to us. It must have been the 12th or 13th time around when the whiteboard read, "Trying to free you at peak." I knew they couldn't write a novel for us, because you can only read so much while going by so fast. But come on, people, what is that supposed to mean? I think they just wanted to tell us they were working on a way to get us down. But that didn't matter. We had been on this ride for nearly 30 minutes, and we felt sick, and our bodies hurt like crazy. A couple loops after that, we saw a fire truck trying to get underneath where the top of the ascend was. Luckily, there was a large space where the truck could pull right beside it. Unfortunately, at its peak, it's about 200 feet in the air. It also didn't have any emergency exits at the top, like most coasters do. You'd think that would be a requirement, but what do I know? We saw the fire truck start to expand the ladder that comes out the top, but it wasn't even close. We waited for the firefighters to try and figure out a solution to save us, as the audience below us was watching us like we were some kind of show. It was close to 45 minutes when the first death occurred. Then one more soon after. There was a skinnier guy in a car behind me. I heard him talking about trying to slip out of the seat restraint, which secured him to his seat. The other guy he was with told him it was a bad idea. So did I. The next time we went up the ascent, he began violently wiggling and thrashing back and forth to the point where people thought he was going to throw off the ride. He managed to wiggle about halfway out, right at the top. But, well, it didn't end very well. His leg got caught on a part of the track and yanked the rest of his body out of the bar restraint. It sent his body crashing down towards the earth, however. I think he was dead soon after he was ripped out of his seat. I didn't see too much of it, but the guy who was beside him let out an insane screech. Hearing that kind of agony as you are feeling the harsh effects of gravity hitting on your chest while going down a steep hill was truly mortifying. The screech out of nowhere stopped, and more people screamed. The man beside him had a heart attack. I could hear the symphony of moans and crying coming from the crowd watching us. I couldn't hear them before because of how loud the ride was, but they were terrified of what they saw. Police tried to escort them out of the park, but it didn't stop people from parking on the side of the road to watch and record on their phones. It made me feel disgusted. At around an hour on the ride, everyone stopped screaming or trying to talk to each other. It seemed like everyone accepted their fate. My nails were deeply embedded into Charlie's wrist. I couldn't scream anymore due to my throat feeling raw from the yelling. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't due to my voice giving out. I saw that I drew a little blood on Charlie, but he was too out of it to notice. He, along with a few other people, were incredibly sick. He threw up probably 5 times by this point and looked cross-eyed. Around that time, the electricity in the whole park shut down. All the lights, everything. I think they were hoping a hard reboot of the whole park would stop the ride. The coaster didn't just rely on gravity, but also on a lot of help from motors and other electronic elements. It all turned off when we were on the straightaway. Of course, it still didn't stop. I could hear someone yelling with frustration, not understanding how it could still be moving if it didn't have an electrical source. After 2 hours, they let some family members come into the loading area, which was a terrible idea. We were doing our best to keep cool and stay calm. Our families washing us, zooming by them every 2 minutes, and absolutely screaming at us. Made it so much worse. My mom was my first family member to show up. Don't get me wrong, I love my mom, but she is very stubborn and wanted something done even though they had already tried everything. Of course, it was just because she wanted me safe, but it was stressing me out. The firefighters put down a safety net underneath the ascent. It was still quite a jump if we could even get out successfully to land on it. And we might be okay, but we were all a little scarred from what happened before. It seemed like they put it out just in case someone tried to get out again. It didn't seem like it was the plan to have us all just jump out of that moving death machine. They weren't desperate enough at that point. We saw a large group of people passionately arguing and yelling at each other. From what I could tell, it was made up of family members, firefighters, and some employees of the park, I'm sure with lots of varying opinions. The ride was on our 3. When the coaster entered the loading area once again, I saw a woman run over to the control panel. A couple people ran over to her and told her to stop and not press the button. She was screaming her head off and wailing. It had been hard to understand people in the past while going by them, but this was as clear as day. As we passed by, I could tell she was starting to break free from the grip of people holding her back. I wasn't too worried. Whatever button she was wanting to press, I'm sure it wouldn't work since none of the other ones worked so far. We were about 5 seconds away from going down the descent when we heard a click come from all our seats. The woman hit the button that unlocked all our overhead seat belts. Of course, the seat belt button worked, but not the button to stop the ride. A few people reacted fast enough to either jump out or snap it back over themselves before the ride went down. Others weren't so lucky. 3 people managed to jump out but didn't survive the fall, despite there now being a giant net to catch anyone who was dumb enough to try and get out that high. One person hit a support beam on the way down, and the other two landed wrong when they hit the net. Their bodies folded in an unnatural manner. As they hit, all 3 died instantly. I would say around half of us that were left managed to get the seatbelt secured. Before going down the hill, everyone else had to hold on for dear life, and unfortunately, I was one of them. I felt my stomach start to drop as I reached up to grab the only thing that would keep me from becoming a part of the pavement below. The restraint wasn't completely useless at this point. I just had a good 12 inches in between my chest and the restraint. As I dug my fingers into the plastic, I hoped I would be fine. Then the ride dropped. I felt my butt lift off the seat I had become so familiar with. I tried to wrap my ankles around the floor of the coaster to keep the rest of my body from flying out. Charlie luckily got the restraint down, so he was trying to get his leg over mine and hold me down with his arm. After the longest 5 seconds of my life, I managed to pull it back down over my chest. I wasn't sure who else got theirs down, but I assumed from how scared a few of them sounded. It wasn't good. All I could think about and look at was the big loop coming up. As we got closer, I could hear swearing from multiple passengers, including someone in front of me. She was violently pulling at the restraint, but it just wasn't budging. I was hoping and praying that the centrifugal force would keep her in her seat. As we went around the big loop, I closed my eyes. I knew I didn't want to see what was about to happen. I heard multiple people screaming and making horrendous cracking sounds. I don't have an exact number, but I would say only 7 people were left. I could see the 2 people in the very front row and Charlie beside me. I recall only hearing 3 other voices behind me at this point. At our 5, 3 more people died while on the ride, 2 of them from a heart attack or something. The third person, well, he watched the person beside him suddenly die while going around one of the bends. He yelled out in anger, and well, I'd actually rather not go into detail, but he died soon after. I saw the whole thing. They were the 2 people left in front of me and Charlie. At our 6, we saw a group of people bringing in what looked like another large net, except that it was in the loading area. The next time we looped around, they wrote something new on the big whiteboard. We are going to try and stop it manually. I had no clue what this meant, but by the look of the net, I was terrified. The next pass, there were people on both sides of the loading area. On one side, the net was wrapped around a large pole that had been somehow fastened into the concrete slab. I saw a large, similar pole on the other side, but the net wasn't yet attached. As we zoomed by, I could hear people trying to rush and hurry behind us. We went around one of the turns, and I cranked my neck, looking to see what plan they had in mind. They were frantically trying to tie the other side of the net to the support beam that was freshly drilled into the ground. I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. How on earth did they think this was a good idea? Was this a last-ditch attempt? I was yelling at them and telling them to stop, but of course they couldn't hear me. Even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They were desperate to get at least someone out of this alive. Or maybe the owner of the park wanted all of us to die, so that no one could publicly talk about the horrific things we went through. As we went past the last bend, the hundreds of people watching the spectacle cheered, clapped, and celebrated, somehow not seeing any of the flaws with this terrible plan. We were on the straightaway, and my heart started to pound again. The few seconds before we hit the net felt like slow motion. I swore I could see everyone's face. They looked happy. I couldn't believe it. It made me upset, because I knew they were all about to be very disappointed. Finally, we hit the net. Of course, it was no match for a giant metal contraption hitting it. The metal pole was ripped out of the concrete slab and smashed down right in between our car and the one behind us. As we headed for the incline, we tried to get the net that attached itself to us off of the coaster. Luckily, we were able to get it off of us, but no luck with the metal beam that was now awkwardly lodged in the coaster. As we started going down, the whole ride started to shake violently. It felt like we were going to fly off the track. We made it to the first turn. I heard a loud snap and screams. The 7 coaster cars behind ours broke off, and the metal beam found its way underneath. As we turned, I watched in disbelief as the cars behind us all went flying off the tracks. At that point in the ride, it was about 50 feet off the ground, still enough to kill them. I wasn't fast enough to close my eyes and saw the whole thing. It went off the track like it had wings and suddenly plummeted down into the earth. The screaming immediately stopped when the ride landed upside down. My imagination filled in the blanks and shuddered at the thought of the carnage below me. And then there were 2 We were hoping that somehow the ride would stop or slow down because we lost the back. 7 cars. I was not sure what the logic was, but we were desperate at this point. After another hour, it was not showing any signs of slowing down. Once we made it to our 8, we expected our fate. I was hoping that this would all be over soon and we could just be done. I don't think either one of us thought we'd get off. We just hoped, at this point, that our deaths would be quick, over. The next couple hours, we noticed a piece of metal on the car ahead of us start to wobble and loosen. I'm not sure if it was just the wear and tear of the ride going for so long or the whole net fiasco. It kept looking like it was about to come loose, and we'd duck out of the way. We were imagining the worst possible outcome, thinking it would fly off and decapitate one of us. Eventually, it did come off, but it wasn't a dramatic moment like we thought it would be. It was so much worse. Instead of coming all the way off, it only partially came off and started grinding loudly against the track. We heard an audible cringing sound from everyone watching below. The sound was horrendous. The thin strip of metal started to find its way underneath the car. Charlie was worried it would dislodge the coaster from its tracks, like we saw just hours before. He told me he was going to try and grab it. I begged him not to. After a few laps of me telling him to just leave it, he made up his mind and contorted his body to try and grab the sharp metal. I couldn't see his hand as he reached down for it, but I could see his face. Somehow, that made it worse. His expression quickly changed from focused to shocked in a matter of seconds. His face was blank. I heard screaming, but had no clue what was going on. He lifted up his arm and I don't think I will ever be able to get the image of what used to be his arm out of my head. When he gripped the metal, it slipped and went deep into his forearm. I tried to grab his shoulder to calm him down, but to my shock, he was calm. He was more silent at that moment than he had been the whole day. He wouldn't even look at me. He was almost mesmerized by the sight of his bloodied, disfigured arm. I felt lightheaded and had a ringing in my ears, watching the blood start to make its way down his entire body, then to me and the floor of the coaster. It was making me feel sick watching the blood move around the car as we went around the twists and turns of the ride. Within minutes, Charlie looked like a ghost. I did my best to try and wrap his arm up with shreds of my shirt, but it was completely pointless. I don't think an old t-shirt can help when you see the bone. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him feel as comfortable as I could, but it was no use. He was fading in and out of consciousness. We began going up the ascent, and he finally looked over at me. I couldn't begin to explain all that I saw in his eyes. I could see the pain and sadness, but also the relief. He knew he was going to die, but I don't think he cared. He gave me a weak nod of the head and looked ahead when we went down the hill. I tried to keep a close eye on him this lap, but it was honestly hard to look at him. I heard him take a deep breath right before the loop. When we finished the loop, I looked over at him, and, well, he was gone. I was now left alone in the death trap. I never imagined it could have gotten any worse. But having a dead body sitting next to you on a roller coaster is not something I would recommend. I was sitting in shock next to my dead friend for a couple hours. I was frozen in fear, not wanting to even think of a way out. After gaining some courage, I contemplated my next move. I came back into reality and realized the coaster was going just slightly slower. It wasn't significant, but if the loops were taking just slightly longer than before, that damn piece of metal that killed Charlie must have made its way underneath and not derailed it but slowed it down. I ended up taking off my shoes and Charlie's shoes. I had a plan that was probably dumb, but if I died, at least it would be in my hands. As I went by the loading area, the coaster started to slow down just before the ascent. I threw all 4 shoes right in front of the ride. A part of a shoe caught the truck in just the right spot. The ride was still. I could feel the coaster almost pulsing, trying to move with all its might. I was sore. My shoulders were badly buried by the shoulder restraints, repeatedly hitting me over and over again. My whole lower half aching from sitting in a hard seat for hours on hours. I took a deep breath and squeezed in my gut like I never had before. I let out a horrific yell as I forced my body out of the restraint that had been holding me down. For the last 12 hours, about 360 times around the track, My heart was racing as I felt the coaster start to win the battle to move again. I managed to squeeze out just seconds before it took off. I was freed and jumped, luckily. I just barely hit the net below. I also managed to hit the net, so I didn't hurt myself too badly. Nothing is worse than what that ride already did to me. I laid on the net, looking up into the sky. In disbelief, I was still. I wasn't moving. It was almost making me feel motion sick not moving around. Like when you are reading a book in the car and you look up after an hour. Everything was blurry. I could barely hear the faint sound of people trying to get to me, but it was mostly just my ears ringing and my heart beating. After just a few minutes, I was down. They immediately rushed me to the ER, where I stayed for 3 weeks. I sustained a broken rib, a broken collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion, just to name a few. Not to mention the mental trauma. I'm writing this as I'm feeling ready to finally tell my story. This is the first time I'm digging back into my memories and recollecting the whole experience. I've started to work through all this with a therapist, and it's made me realize I need to get it all out of my system. Don't bother trying to find anything about this story. The owners of the park have done a suspiciously good job hiding it. That's another reason I want to get my story out there. They have completely scrubbed the internet of it somehow. Although talking with a professional has helped, there are still some sounds and images that I can just never completely get out of my head. If you take one thing from my story, it's that you should trust yourself. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or gut instincts, if you have a feeling, trust it. Please. My Uncle Matt never existed me family, and I have been going through a very strange experience. Over the last couple of months, it's hard to even put into words or explain what is going on. I guess I can just start off from where it all started. To feel off, a few months back my family had a big get-together. My parents both have two siblings. They all got married and had some kids. Well, all of them except Uncle Matt. He never got married or had kids. That means I have 10 cousins. My aunts and uncles all live within 2 hours of us, so we've all grown up together. That being said, we don't normally have all my aunts and uncles in a house at once. This was a rare occasion to have a family meal when they were all free. I will not be naming every single family member in this post, because that seems like a lot of information, and honestly, you've already gotten more information about my family than you ever wanted. But I promise this context is important. Okay, enough with my babbling. Let's talk about what happened that weird night. My parents and I went over to my Aunt Margot and Uncle Ken's house for a BBQ in the backyard. The backyard felt loud and chaotic. I tried to stay out of the way and get the night over with. I was honestly just there for the free food. We were all sitting down at a big table outside. I was so focused on making sure none of the napkins went flying in the wind, I wasn't listening to the conversation. My Aunt Margot came over to the table with a plate of really burnt hot dogs. My mom immediately started to laugh at the sight of them. Is burning food genetic or something? How on earth do you guys always do that to food? The Jensens need to leave the cooking to the Millers, my mom said with a sarcastic giggle. Uncle Ken looked at her confused. What are you on about, Liz? Uncle Ken snapped back. I mean, Margot burnt the hot dogs and Matt always burns food when he cooks. Remember, we had to ban him for months from cooking because we had to order takeout like 3 times in a row. Everyone at the table laughed, recalling their memories. Sighs of recollection bounced back and forth from person to person when my dad spoke up in Aunt Margot's defense. Honey, what are you talking about? Matt is your brother. I really shouldn't have to remind you of that. My mom rolled her eyes in response to my dad. I spoke up because I was suddenly confused about which side of the family Uncle Matt was actually on. You would think I would naturally just know that. But all my aunts and uncles act like siblings and call each other their siblings. My grandparents often refer to their son, daughter-in-laws, as just their kids, so it isn't something I always think about. Wait, I'm confused. Whose side is Uncle Matt on? What is the joke? I don't get it. I asked, but was only met with a laugh from all the parents at the table. I finally got an answer from my mom following the silence of the joke that somehow went over my head. Don't be silly, baby. Matt is your dad's brother. As the words left her mouth, half the table looked confused, Liz, what are you talking about? He is on your side. He is a Miller, my Aunt Margot said as she scraped off the burnt edges of her hot dog. Okay, now I'm with Amanda. I don't get the joke, my mom said while looking at me with narrow, inquisitive eyes, and then at the rest of the group. Wait, everyone. Slow down, Aunt June said, speaking up for probably the first time in the night. This is dumb. Matt is not Liz and I's brother. He has to be on the Jensen's side of the family. I sat at the table watching my family in silence. Their eyes darted back and forth. They stopped laughing and were all just scratching their heads. After a few minutes, my mom got out her phone. She found an old family photo from when she was a kid. In the photo were her, my grandparents, my Uncle Paul, and my Aunt June. Nothing out of the ordinary. After looking at the picture, Aunt Margot got out her phone and looked for an old childhood photo. Asterisk aha, found one, she stated as she showed off the photo on her phone. Yet again, the photo was normal. It had my grandparents, my dad, Aunt Margot, and Aunt Susan. The next arc consisted of both sides of the family going back and forth showing photos. None of them with Uncle Matt in them. I had a few of my cousins there, but they all lost interest once they ate. I, on the other hand, couldn't be pulled away. I was engrossed in learning where the heck Uncle Matt came from. They kept talking back and forth. They figured maybe he wasn't anyone's sibling. Maybe he was related by marriage or a second cousin. Twice removed that I just called Uncle Matt because that was the easiest thing to call him. We all have a relative like that, right? I know an easy solution you might be thinking of is to just call him up. That's also what I said, but he was working and they didn't want to interrupt him. But guess what? I needed answers. So I decided to call him. However, when I looked at my phone, I couldn't find him in my contacts. I looked through it multiple times. I remembered texting him about something a few days back, so he should have been in my text history. Still nothing. After being weirded out by his contact being gone, I mentioned out loud that someone should call him. Regardless of him being at work, no one agreed with me. But once I told them his contact was missing from my phone, they all got curious and looked to see if he was missing for them too. That we were all in shock to find him missing from all our phones. The family started to dig through their camera rolls and any digital libraries they had to try and find any photo of him. Uncle Andrew thought he had a photo of the back of him, but we soon found that we all remembered him looking differently. Uncle Andrew showed a picture of the back of a bald man who looked pretty tall. Aunt June called him crazy and recalled him having long curly red hair. It wasn't like we hadn't seen him in a year or that he was some kind of distant memory. I saw the guy last week. He came over to my house to help me with some homework, and I can tell you he didn't have red hair or no hair at all. He was, well, shoot. I can't remember what he looked like now that I think about it. It was safe to say we were all creeped out. As the sun went down and it got chilly out, the group moved inside. Normally, this is when everyone would go home, but I saw Aunt Margot start a pot of coffee. It was going to be a long night. The air was tense and full of unease. None of the adults wanted to go home until they had answers. I could tell the adults wanted to talk more, but didn't want to worry the younger cousins. My older cousin Maddie clearly didn't care about anything that was going on. She just wanted to sleep. We convinced her to take my 3 young cousins into the basement so they could all get some sleep. But not me. I was invested. Uncle Matt and I are close. We see each other all the time. How could I not have a shred of evidence that he even existed? As my cousins shuffled downstairs, all the adults huddled around a big whiteboard Aunt Margot slapped on the kitchen island. They started to write down everything they could remember. What he looked like, the last time they saw him, memories of him. None of it was coherent. It seemed he was a completely different person. In all our memories, even if it was a memory where multiple people were around, one of the only things that we could all agree on was that the Jensens always thought he was on the Miller side of the family, and the Millers always thought he was on the Jensen side. My mom recalled a story of Matt and my dad going to a lake to fish, but the hook got stuck on Matt's hat and went flying. My dad told us he remembered my mom telling him the same exact story many times. Everyone had memories of stories where he was on the other side of the family. Soon everyone was on the phone, with a new family member trying to tell them the situation and asking what they thought about Everything. My aunts and uncles were talking to realities on the phone I didn't know I had. Relatives that probably only met Matt a couple times at best. All I heard was one dead end at a time. No one knew where he came from or where he went. So the big question was, who was Matt? Was he just some random guy who weaseled his way into the family, telling one side of the family one thing and the other side another? Or was it something so much worse? As the sun came up that Saturday morning, we were all still scratching our heads. The deeper we got into who Matt was, the more freaked out everyone got. I was honestly surprised they let me stay with them all night long. The more digging everyone did, the farther away we felt. The more rabbit holes we went down, the less real he seemed. We couldn't find any evidence that he ever existed. Some of us searched all over the internet for Matt Jensen or Matt Miller, and a few of us searched for other last names in the family. Of course, it was kind of hard to know who we were looking for, given we didn't know what he really looked like. After hours of discussion, we compiled a list of attributes that never wavered about Uncle Matt. He was a man. He never had a mustache. He was tall. He was bad at math. And he loved Jim Carrey movies. That might seem like a random grouping of facts, but that's because it was. We couldn't even remember where his house was. Some of us completely forgot, and others remembered different houses. It didn't matter. We weren't going to start knocking on doors to find a man we were concerned never existed. We started to believe that as soon as we began to question who he was. He just simply started to fade away into nothingness, like it was some kind of self-destructive on his own consciousness. It was around 9 a.m. that morning when people started to fall asleep on couches. The night before started with everyone being determined and saying the night wouldn't end until we found Uncle Matt. But here we all were, exhausted and with little to no answers. It felt like accepting defeat by napping on the couch, but we couldn't do much else. At 11 a.m., we all woke up to the sound of my cousins playing in the next room over. We all sat up and rubbed our eyes. You could practically see the gears turning in everyone's heads as they woke up from their stupors. I could tell when they realized their memories actually happened, and it wasn't just a weird fever dream. My Aunt Margot stumbled to the kitchen while yawning and started to dig in the pantry for something substantial the kids could all eat. It was clear they had already raided the cookie stash. As the adults had a quiet conversation, we heard something come from my cousin Cass that made us freeze. Yeah, remember last night when Uncle Matt gave us all those cookies? It was so much fun. My small cousin said with a hop and a skip. Wait, Cass, get over here and say that again. My Uncle Andrew yelled in an attempt to sound intimidating, but came out with a voice crack. Cass walked over to us looking like a confused puppy who just got yelled at. What did I do wrong, Uncle Andrew? I thought if Uncle Matt offered us cookies, I could have them. Cass, you are not in trouble. This is very important. Are you telling me Uncle Matt was with you guys last night? Uncle Andrew tried to say in a gentle tone to not scare Cass. I mean, not the whole night, but he brought us all cookies and put a movie on for us. Then he said he wanted to go hang out with you guys upstairs. Cass told us with a quiet voice. Everyone started to frantically look around the room, looking for any evidence of him being there. Last night, we quickly asked the rest of the cousins if they saw Matt, and some kids did and some didn't. I noticed something when I started to count the objects in the room. There were 10 adults and me upstairs last night, so there should have been 11 people in total, but I saw 12 plates out with the leftover crumbs from our late-night pizza, 12 spots laid out for sleeping in the living room, and 12 mugs or cups of coffee. He was here last night. As I mentioned what I found, my dad said he remembered seeing him last night. He said Matt brought him some water. Uncle Paul said he saw him go to the bathroom, but couldn't remember him coming out. They mentioned how it felt like it never actually happened, but he managed to place the memory in them after the fact. How else would they see Uncle Matt right in front of them and not realize what was happening? I had a strange feeling that started to bubble up. I felt uneasy and restless. Wait, something is off here, I said loudly to the room. Everyone line up on the wall. I want to try something. For a second they all looked at me confused. They normally wouldn't let me boss them around like that, but they were desperate and tired. All the adults lined up against the wall. As I walked by, then I counted out loud. Something strange happened. I counted 12 people including me. None of the kids were lined up. I wasn't counting myself twice. There was an extra person. Uncle Matt wasn't just here last night. He was with us in the room at that moment. Other members of the family even tried to count. We did it over and over again, even adding one of the kids to the mix. But every single time there was one extra person, but we still couldn't see him. How was he hiding in plain sight? Everyone ended up leaving my Aunt Margot's house that afternoon. We were all still extremely creeped out about the whole thing, but what could we do about it? Not much. It's not like Uncle Matt ever did anything violent. Mostly normal behavior except for a few memories of him that were kinda weird. One of us remembered seeing him in the kitchen, stacking and unstacking bowls for hours. Another person remembered him once packing for a vacation, but his suitcase only had trash bags in it. And I have a memory of us sitting in front of a fireplace with him reading the instruction manual to a blender for a bedtime story, asterisk. At least those were the kind of memories we had in the beginning. As the weeks went on, we started to remember things that got more and more concerning. He showed up in our houses in the middle of the night, or buying us all hammers for Christmas. He once bought hundreds of dollars worth of knives and put them in my dad's car. Once we developed disturbing memories of him, we tried to tell the police. Of course, they couldn't find any evidence of his existence, so they couldn't help. It didn't help our case that we couldn't even give them a last name. How on earth are they supposed to find a guy based on his name being Matt and no physical feature? Who is Uncle Matt? I can say with 100% certainty, I have no clue. Is he a man? Is he an entity? Is he a figment of our imaginations? Or is he nothing at all? I don't know, and that's the worst part of all. He seems to always be around at family dinners. Most of the time I count the number of people, I end up with an extra person. He feels like a virus, always implanting a memory of himself being around, but in the moment I never see him. It seems to be a family joke at this point, always leaving out an extra plate for him or something. In my opinion, no one is taking this situation seriously. I know he hasn't hurt anyone, but why should we wait for something to happen? I swear I can feel it when he shows up. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My family has given up on trying to figure out who or what Uncle Matt is, but I haven't. It feels like they have all just forgotten the disturbing memories of him. I swear the deeper I dig to find him, the worse the memories get. Like he is rotting and festering in my memories, right before my eyes. I'm starting to think it's his attempt to stop me from looking for him. The fact that he is punishing me for looking for him makes my concern grow more and more. Why is he suddenly running now that I am onto him? Why is he so afraid of me finding him? And what will happen once I do find him? I will find you, Uncle Matt. I will find out what you are.